In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to store numbers and text in variables and then display their values in a browser. I'll also show what happens if you use illegal names for your variables. Open your script editor and create a PHP file. I've called mine display values PHP and stored it in the basics folder of my testing site. To focus on the PHP code, I've removed all the HTML and just have an opening PHP tag. I'm only going to be using PHP in this script, so I've omitted the closing PHP tag. The first variable I'm going to create will be first name, and I'll use camel case, so the N is uppercase. Now that I've got a variable, it needs a value. Variables can get their values from a variety of sources, including user input from online forms, a database, an external source such as a news feed or XML file, the result of a calculation, or direct inclusion in the PHP code. Whichever source you get the value from, it's always applied in the same way. You use the assignment operator, which is an equal sign, followed by the value. I'm going to assign the value of my own name, David, and I need to finish off with a semicolon. In PHP, you must always finish your commands with a semicolon. It's not like JavaScript where the semicolon is optional at the end of a command. In PHP, it's mandatory. Unlike some programming languages, you don't need to specify the type of data stored by a variable. So I could in fact change the value of first name by assigning it a different value. This time I'll assign it a number. Again, finish with the semicolon. Now you notice the difference between the text and the number is that the number is not surrounded by quotes. The ability to change the data type from text to a number on the fly like this can be useful in some circumstances, but generally it's not a good idea. That's why it's best practice to choose really meaningful names for your variables. So I'm going to change this back from first name to total. So we have two different variables now, one which holds some text and one which holds a number. Numbers can have decimal points like this, but it's important to note that the decimal point must be a dot or a period. You can't use a comma, as is common in some European countries. The other point to note about numbers is you can't use a comma as the thousands separator. Let's say I want to make this 10,055.55. I need to write it like that without inserting a comma as the thousands separator. If I put in a comma, you'll see that my editor has told me there's a syntax error. So if I just take that out, everything goes back to normal. So now we have some text and a number stored as variables. Let's save the page and see what happens when we load the page into a browser. There's nothing there. The reason that there's nothing there is we've stored the values in variables, but we haven't done anything to display them. The way in which you display the value of text or numbers that are stored as variables is by using echo or print. So let's use echo. First name. Again, don't forget the semicolon at the end. I'll save that and look at it in the browser again. And it has displayed the value that is stored in the variable first name. Often you'll see that parentheses are used with echo. If I just add parentheses around first name, resave and view in the browser again, just reload that, you'll see that it's made absolutely no difference whatsoever. So my recommendation is not to use the parentheses. Anything that saves typing is worthwhile doing. So let's see what happens with print. remove echo and change it to print, and in the browser reload it, exactly the same. So you might be wondering, well, why bother having two commands that do exactly the same thing? Well, there is a difference between print and echo. Print can only display a single value, whereas echo can use a comma-separated list. So if I do echo and then total, comma, first name, save that. We just check that in the browser. You'll see that both values are now displayed. And even though I've got a space after the comma before first name, there is no space in what is displayed. If you need to add space to what you are displaying, you have to add that as text. Now I've followed the correct naming conventions for variables, but let's just see what happens if I change first name and use a number immediately after the $sign. My editor has told me that there's a syntax error, but I just want to check to see what happens in the browser, so I'll save it and reload. And now I've got this ugly and rather difficult error message which tells me that there is a syntax error, unexpected TL number. PHP error messages can be quite difficult to understand when you first start out, and there is a separate video which deals with the most common error problems. If you didn't get an error message and you got a completely blank screen, that means that display errors is turned off in your PHP configuration, and you need to go back to the video which explains how to change the PHP configuration by editing PHP ini to turn display errors on. It's important to have errors displayed when you're testing. So let's just change that back to first name and see what happens if I use a hyphen between the two. Again, the script editor has detected a syntax error, so I'll just remove that and everything goes back to normal. So it's important to remember that the only characters that you can use in naming variables are letters, numbers, and the underscore, and the first character after the $sign mustn't be a number. But letters aren't restricted to the 26 letters of the Roman alphabet. You can also use accented characters common in Western European languages. So let's say if my native language were French, I could use prénom instead of first name. And one of the things that you can do is you can assign a variable as the value to another variable. So if I assign the value of first name to prénom, and let's just remove that line and echo prénom, save the file and refresh the browser, it's now displaying David. So I've assigned the value David to first name and then the value of first name to prénom. So we have David in both variables. So that concludes this basic introduction to storing text and numbers as variables and then displaying their values using echo and print. Although echo and print perform essentially the same task, my preference is to use echo without parentheses. It's less typing and does the job equally well.